So prynawn da and croeso, good afternoon and welcome. Thank you for joining us today for this digital transformation webinar, the digital strategy for Wales in conversation with Lee Waters. So we're delighted to be joined by Deputy Minister for Climate Change, Lee Waters. Welcome, Lee, and Victoria Ford, Managing Director at Parago. And they're going to be discussing how the digital strategy for Wales links between the digital and climate change, connectivity, and how we've developed digital skills within Wales. And if we've time allowing, we've got a whole lot more to go as well. But it's not just about our questions to Lee. We'd like you to get involved as well. Throughout today, we'd like you to be as interactive as possible. So please do put your questions in the Q&A, put your hands up, however you like to do it. I'll be there to read your questions, but I'd like also to pick a few out as well and invite you up to the stage when we have a Q&A session towards the end as well. But if you don't want to, or you're not comfortable to, I'll wait a couple of seconds and I'll take the hint and I'll ask the question on your behalf. So we've also like to welcome Angharad as well. Angharad, just to give a little wave, Angharad's going to be supporting us today with any Welsh language stuff. So vice versa, if you'd like to ask us questions in Welsh, or if any of us would like to do anything in Welsh as well, Angharad would be able to be that translation layer. Angharad, do you want to say a bit about how that's going to work today?
Ie, pnawn da I chi a croeso mawr i'r sesiwn gyntaf Digital Leaders Cymru, Lenny. Mae croeso chi rannu sylwadau yn ystod y sesiwn yn Gymraeg a na i gyfieithu nhw i chi. Mae yna hefyd groeso mawr i chi ofyn cwestiwn Gymraeg i'r gweinidog ar ddiwedd y sesiwn a mi allai eto gyfieithu. Diolch yn fawr i chi a mwynhewch y sesiwn heddiw.
Diolch, Angharad. So I think there's, even if we're learning Welsh, I think let's all have confidence today to give it a little try, and Angharad will have our back anyway. So, so just one more point. If anyone has any technical questions today, feel free to put it in the chat. I'll do my best to help you, but we want this to kind of go as smooth as possible. But I think that's everything I need to say. And with that, I'd like to hand over to Victoria Ford. Victoria.
Diolch, Chris. Diolch, Angharad. Pnawn da a chroeso i'n digwyddiad Digital Leaders Cymru cyntaf eleni. Good afternoon and welcome to our first Digital Leaders Wales event of 2022. As Chris says, my name is Victoria Ford and I'm Chair of Digital Leaders in Wales. Digital Leaders is a shared professional space for leadership that goes across all sectors to promote and support digital, to promote economic growth, increase social well-being and narrow social gaps. And as part of Digital Leaders, we're running a series of events over the course of this year here in Wales. We're hoping that some of those will be face-to-face later this year, fingers crossed, as well as continuing with virtual events to allow as many people as possible to engage, share good practice and to learn. And we're going to be shaping all of our events this year around the digital strategy for Wales that we think is a really good pinpoint for any activity that's going to be happening across sectors in Wales and really thinking about how we can improve outcomes for people living here in Wales. So today's is about strategy as a whole, and then future sessions will be based around each of the strategy's 6 missions. So a year ago, Welsh Government launched the Digital Strategy for Wales, and it had a clear vision, which was to improve the lives of everyone through collaboration, innovation, and better public services. And as importantly, this strategy was accompanied by a delivery plan and actions that are going to deliver better outcomes for the people of Wales. When I joined forces with some ex-colleagues about 5 years ago to create Parago, we were clear that digital isn't all about technology. It's about designing services around the needs of users, creating organisations with the culture and skills for change to succeed, but ultimately it's about people. And the Digital Strategy for Wales cemented that thinking and has the opportunity to bring a real shift in thinking around innovation and service delivery here in Wales. I'm really pleased to be joined today by the Deputy Minister for Climate Change, Lee Waters. And when I first met Lee about 4 years ago, we talked about the need for digital leadership and about a focus on user-centred service design to deliver better services for the people of Wales. Lee has championed digital in Welsh Government and has been instrumental in the creation of the digital strategy. So, a year since its launch, we're going to be talking today about what's been achieved over the last year and what the next steps need to be. Lee, welcome.
Hello, Croeso. No, you go, Croeso. Can I just say the way that you've introduced Welsh at the beginning is brilliant. Mae'n just mor bwysig i defnyddio peth sydd dyn ni a bod yn cyfforddus symud ymlaen rhwng Saesneg a Cymraeg hefyd. I think it's just really important just to use the bits we've got and just to be relaxed about it. And people who have some or people who have a little and want more. So I think that's great.
Thank you, Lee. And as a learner, my one line I had to say in Welsh has been the thing I've been most nervous about all day. So hopefully you understood it. But I've given it a go where I can. Don't expect much more from me. But that's why we wanted Angharad here, so people can feel comfortable engaging this in a way that works for them. So
brilliant.
So when you launched the strategy last year, one of the things you did actually was go out and try and get it out to people in advance of its publication, to try and get some feedback and build in and the iterate it as we go. And some of the stuff that I've done before this session today is go out as well to try and find out where people think we've got to, what areas they're interested in hearing more about. So I've tried to reflect that in some of the areas we want to cover today. But I suppose before we start with any questions I may have from that group or from myself, it'd be good to hear a bit more about why you've chosen to focus on digital, from your own personal perspective, but actually as a minister working in the Welsh Government in Wales.
Well, it goes back to before I came into politics, really, and some work I did when I ran the Institute for Welsh Affairs around trying to use crowdsourcing for policy development. And we did a number of projects, and things kept coming up. For example, we did one called Let's Talk Cancer with Macmillan. No, it wasn't with Macmillan, it was 10 of us. What was interesting there, we thought people wanted to talk about access to high-cost drugs or waiting lists, and actually they wanted to talk about patient experience things. So text messages when their appointments were delayed, access to patient notes, which really surprised us. And then in the conversations we then had with the government, the answer was always, it's too difficult, it's going to take ages, it's all very complicated. And so that was very much in my mind as I became elected. And then I was on the Public Accounts Committee, and time and again, things were coming to us which involved some kind of IT issue. The first thing I remember was the quality of patient food in hospitals. And the answer was, it's all about a nurse record, and the nurse record's been delayed, and it's going to take 7 years. And whenever I challenged, the answer was, it's going to take 7 years, it's all very complicated, and this is an IT problem. And the more I unpicked, this became a bit of a theme, really. So I got the bit in my teeth between that, and I had some great help from a number of people, including David Jones, who was on one of the health boards, to give me some bullets to fire, really. And the more I pushed, the more I realized there was a systemic problem here, the way digital was seen, and how unlocking it was a chance to change the way public services work. I know, because I'm not interested particularly in digital as an end in itself. I'm not a tech person. I'm interested in changing services that work for people, improving the quality of public services. And for me, digital was a way into that in a run the back of the building sort of way, because we've tried so many different approaches for public service reform and they never get anywhere. And I thought digital was a way, through the user-centered framing, of coming at it again, fresh, in a way that also brought other benefits.
And I suppose sticking with that public service delivery a moment, which for people here who've read the strategy, that's mission number one. It's the thing that you're aiming to do. But when you launched the strategy last year, there were a number of areas of public service delivery where you said digital can make a real shift, like health, social care, local authorities. So have you started to see the shift that you were hoping for? So, for example, are the right leadership roles starting to be in place and focusing on digital? Are those services starting to get designed? Are we seeing some of the breakdown of organisational boundaries? Has the baton been picked up in the way that you've been hoping?
Well, clearly it's a complex landscape with lots of moving parts, and some are moving better than others. And I think, this is going to take time. This is a culture change. But I'm very encouraged by the progress that's been made in the year. Particularly the way the Digital Centre for Public Services has taken off and is working, and you've played an important role in that, Victoria, as you did in the system reboot report we did before I became into government, to try and frame really a lot of the issues that have flown, both in the creation of the centre and in the strategy, because the strategy very much is a reflection of the work that we did with others in that expert group. So this has been an iterative process, as you'd expect in digital, and it will continue to be. But I'm very encouraged by the progress in a year, and over the last couple of years, really. And COVID has definitely helped open leaders' mind up to the change and the speed of change that is possible. But, let's not kid ourselves, we've got an awful long way to go. But some of the early work that's been done on the landscape review around the creation of the CDOs and the people who've got in those roles and the way they bedded in, I think the way Sam Hall has established herself as the CDO for local government has been brilliant, and the way she's creating a team around her and the engagement that she's getting with services is creating now, I think, a head of steam. It's still a way to go. I've been disappointed that we haven't been able to create an NHS CDO. I think the NHS remains an area where a lot of good work has been done, and certainly the work that the Digital Healthcare Wales did during the pandemic and the recognition that's had is really important, but there's still a lot of legacy schemes that are stuck in the mud. And I think also the understanding and acceptance of the term user need and user researcher has got a long way to go in the NHS. So there's a long way to go for sure, but I think we've made a reasonable start.
And on that basis, let's take it back to the strategy itself a moment. I talked a moment ago about how you made an iterative start to it, put it out there, got feedback, built it in, published it a year ago. We've seen so many strategies, well, I have in my time in public sector in particular, that get written, big fanfare, put on the shelf, and actually you don't hear from them again. They're there, you go searching a couple of years later and they're still there with the targets they had. What's going to make this one different, or what needs to happen to make this one different?
Well, I think the reason why I'm encouraged, because it's about distributed leadership, really. This is not about hero leadership. This has got to be owned by the system. And I think that's what I'm so encouraged by, the discovery exercise that Sally Meacham did to create the case for the centre, and then the way she set the centre up and reached out to people, I think has created a sense of ownership across public services and beyond. And that's how this is going to succeed. This is not down to a minister. Ministers come and go. This has got to be about people realising the value that digital has. I must say, I think we have a really great, very small team of civil servants, Glyn Jones, Janine Hepworth, and the others in the team, Rita Batstone as well, have been fantastic. And that really makes a difference, because there's leadership at an official level. I dedicate time to it. Ministerially, we have monthly sessions with officials right across government to look at the themes in the digital strategy and chase progress, share good practice. So I think that sort of eye of Mordor from ministerial level is important as well, but that shifts around inevitably to other things. So we're keeping that going, and that's why the centre is so important. I think the handover from Sally Meacham as of the founder, creator of the centre to Myra and I'm very sorry, my head is floating. Harriet, thank you. Who again, brilliant example of job share in a high-profile public body. I think it's fantastic. They are a ball of energy, and I was really encouraged last week in a show I shan't bore you with. We got them to do a bit of scrutiny, and I was told they kicked ass. And that's brilliant. That's exactly what I wanted to hear, because there's a sense that you can't bullshit people anymore. There's now a guiding mind of experts who will call out bullshit in the system, and I think that's really important. But equally important, as well as calling it out, is the helping hand how to make it better, and those two things need to go in tandem. So I think that senior system leadership is vital, but also then is the shared leadership through the system, and the way that Sports Wales, NRW, others have come forward with projects to say, look, we get this, we want help us, we want to do this, is also really encouraging.
And just going back to your role there as a minister for a moment. So Wales has declared a climate emergency, and your ministerial role spans both climate and digital now. How do we make sure that digital becomes part of the solution rather than part of the problem? What thinking is going into that part of digital for Wales?
Well, I think what we're ambitious, I think, and we're trying to make digital a part of the solution to every problem, not just a set of problems, because it's about making things easier for people to do the right thing. I think the way that we saw, I think COVID has been brilliant in the sense that it's made digital high profile within government. So that, the way we've used data, the way we've analysed data, the role of CAS within the Welsh Government has been very prominent. The First Minister is an avid consumer of their products, which is really important. Keeping that going and resourcing it is obviously a challenge, but we've seen again through the storms 2 weeks ago, that, the data that was generated through COVID, being able to map where vulnerable people were, was used in the response of public services to the storms. So again, I think it's those penny drop moments where people see, I've said all along, Victoria, as you know, that digital isn't about kit, it's about culture. And I think people who are not digitally minded are seeing this helps them to do the things they want to do. It's not a technical specialist field for nerds. It's a way of improving everything that we do.
Good. I don't want to be classed as a technical nerd, so I'm glad to hear that. Sticking with the data bit a moment then. So one of the things when I was out talking to people ahead of this event, somebody was saying to me, well, actually, we hear quite a lot about data-driven decisions and how important that is, but there feels like there's still lots of gaps in collaboration and that general awareness of open data sets and the skills that are needed across all sectors, not just public sector, to take forward sound action-based on analysis of trends and what's going on in that data space. What do we need to be doing to better understand and use the data that already exists across Wales, never mind what could be there in the future?
Well, in my enthusiasm, I don't want to mislead the things everything is great, because everything isn't great. There's a long way to go for sure. But I think my focus has been, let's try and get the fundamentals right. And what's been a barrier to change. And I remain convinced that leadership understanding of what digital is the first door we need to go through. And still, that is still low, I think. And I think the centre is definitely helping. And I say the landscape review will also help us to have those conversations, to have an honest appraisal of where things are at. So I think once you get leaders to understand digital is their business, and it is just a tool to improve things, there's nothing mystical about it. And it's not as complicated as you might think it is. That's the first important thing. And then it's having recognized that, looking honestly at the attitudes and the skill sets around them to make sure those skills are then embedded and spread out. And we got a long way to go on that. I think we made a start on that, but we don't have the people, we don't have the mindsets, and we don't have the sharing of good practice yet to start to more than scratch the surface, but I think we have scratched the surface.
And that skills bit is, well, it's one of the missions of the strategy for start, so it's in there as mission number 3, but obviously a really important part of this. As you say, some stuff's happened, which is good, starting to upskill people, whether it's availability of training courses, putting people into organisations, helping them. Thinking wider than public sector here for a moment, talking to some businesses in Wales in recent months, there's been a sense that private funding and investment into Wales and businesses in Wales can be challenging because there's a perception that Wales can't attract the skills and capability it needs for businesses to be created, to thrive, and actually importantly to remain here in Wales. So whilst we've seen a lot about upskilling individuals and organisations in digitals, which is really positive as a first step, if we're going to really prosper economically and attract investment into Wales, it feels like we need to be doing more. How does the strategy help in that space? How does it get us the right people to get businesses here, but also for people to recognise that Wales can do this stuff and we do have the ambition?
Well, what you're describing is not unique to digital, is it? That's the problem we have with the Welsh economy. So these are interrelated problems, and the Welsh economy is challenged. There's no point pretending otherwise. And building and retaining businesses, is not a new phenomenon. The challenge around it. So that's why I think that part of the focus mine has been on the public sector bit, because I think it's about creating a skills pipeline, about creating a culture that then is more open to understanding the whole landscape and the role the private sector has onto that. I think one of the biggest challenges we have is around skills. And I think that is the one bit of the digital strategy that has not woken up properly yet. We're talking about it, and we're looking at some of the things that we can do, but it's nowhere near where it needs to be. But it's in the strategy. There's a recognition that it matters. But that I think trying to reflect honestly on progress, that bit it needs a lot more work and thinking, I think.
And where does that sit necessarily? Because as you said, it's not just about public sector. So the Centre for Digital Public Services is there to do some of that public sector upskilling, but it's across all sectors in Wales. Is that ownership somewhere in Welsh Government that's going to pick it up and help push some of this stuff?
Yes, well, it is. And the sessions I have monthly looking at the themes in the strategy are done with other ministers. So, for example, on the skills, I did it jointly with Vaughan Gith, the economy minister. So it'll be a changing cast depending on the relevant theme. And there is an understanding that this is important, but I think our job is to keep the pressure on. But again, also, this can't be just about the Welsh Government. And this, I think, one of my observations about Wales for a long time is, since the creation of devolution, there's hardly a meeting that concludes anywhere in Wales that doesn't have some blame or complaint or criticism or ask of the Welsh Government. And the Welsh Government is small. And if we are going to expect the Welsh Government to solve all our problems, then we are screwed, because the Welsh Government is not set up to do that. It should be there as a catalyst and as a strategic enabler, not as a doer of everything. And that's why the role of the strategy is not just about the Welsh Government. It's shared leadership across the system. So that's why it's important, as I said, the public bodies, and I'm good to see in the chat some of the public bodies making themselves heard on this. This has to be shared, and then the role of as you say, of the private sector in this, and they need to invest in skills as well, and of the universities. And we've got the Digital Nation Accelerator, the DNA project, bloody awful title in my view, but nonetheless, it is what it is, which came out of the Brown Review, which was something I agitated for, and work is going on with universities now to make sure that the way that's designed is not just academic, it has practical applied use, and skills is an important part of that, and the universities have got a really important role to play, along with the FE colleges, to make that real. And then the conversation with business, and I think business in a way is a microcosm of the rest of the ecosystem, because understanding within lots of businesses of what digital is and what it means to their business is also very immature.
Yeah, and sticking a minute with that economy bit, actually, and then we'll go to some of the questions in the chat, if that's all right, and see if people want to join in. There's get the mission right. I think it's mission 4 that's the economy, but it doesn't matter. But there is a mission on the economy, and that's got that aim to drive economic prosperity in Wales. And there's some frustration with companies across Wales who feel that there's a stronger role for public procurement to play to achieve this. So I get what you're saying about it's wider than Welsh Government, but actually there are roles for Welsh Government to play to allow others to do their part in it. So, our procurement specialists, so they're really understanding what that strategy set out to do and how we can exploit that digital innovation. So, for example, I was hearing the story about how a recent software contract for Welsh Government was awarded to a multinational. So that was a contract that could have delivered on the data, skills and economic missions of the strategy, but it didn't appear to form part of that procurement process. So what role is there for public procurement in delivering what the strategy needs it to do for those better outcomes? And how do we make sure that it's understood by the people involved in procurement strategies, policies, processes? Is that happening somewhere?
Yeah, and that is an absolutely fair challenge. And we have a challenge around procurement, and we want to support SMEs like yours, Victoria, and others to be able to get a fair crack at this. And the process actually around procurement reform is paralleled the reform agenda around digital, and I was inspired by the experience and have copied and pasted it essentially. So we've done a discovery exercise now of the procurement landscape. The Future Generations Commissioner's Office produced a report calling for a centre for excellence of procurement, because there's a real issue of skills, capability, capacity in procurement professions around Wales. Is a sector we've undervalued, and again we've seen through the pandemic the importance of it. And where we have strengths in it, we didn't have a PPE crisis in Wales in the same way they did in England, because we had good, strong public sector coordinated procurement. But we don't have that in every area, and digital is an area that needs change. So we've done now the first phase of the delivery phase of the procurement, of the discovery exercise for a Centre for Public Excellence for Procurement, and we're now going into the beta stage of looking at how we create something which allows, like the Digital Centre has, the sharing of expertise, practice, and the doing bit that will allow us to raise skills and awareness across the public sector, and digital is part of that.
Yeah, and it is about bringing all those things together, isn't it? You know, the strategy is ambitious, which is brilliant. You know, it's what people like us living in Wales want it to be. We want it to do more, but we need to be looking now about how we make that ambition happen. So it's good to hear some of that's going on. I'm going to pause. Chris, I haven't had a good look through the chat, but are there any questions in there you'd like to call out, or would anyone like to stick their hand up and ask Lee a question while I pause? I have some other things I wanted to cover, but let's give someone else a chance for a second.
Yeah, I think James, you're welcome to pose your question. You were kind of first off the blocks, if that's okay. If you're about, I've just permitted you to pop your question to Lee. Just wait a couple of seconds for.
Perhaps he doesn't want to. Perhaps he just wants to leave it in the chat.
No, no.
No, he's there.
Oh, he's here.
Yes, yeah. So I mean, it's like the old adage of layers of governance, if you like. So talking to a number of colleagues across Welsh public sector, if you like, and things on that measure, is the Centre for Digital Public Services in its current iteration sort of delayed things actually happening? And the comparison I give is like talking to the head of social care in a local authority that used to say our biggest barrier to innovation was the IT department, and they wanted to do something quickly and outside of maybe in a digital way, outside of the IT department. The IT department would say, no, you can't do it like that. You've got to follow that. And is the Centre of Digital Public Services sort of preventing people from getting things done now, because they've got to, in their mind, they're thinking, oh, I've got to do it in this way, otherwise we can't get it done as Welsh Government wants it done.
Okay, well, thank you for the question.
Is the Centre of Digital?
Yeah, and I think it's really important that we are not defensive of the centre. We are self-critical, and if there's concern or unease, let's have an open culture where that can be said and reflected upon honestly. So I'm trying to answer the question in that spirit, and I see Myra's in the chat is keen to have a go at it as well. In a sense, James, if some things are being stopped, that's not a bad thing. You know, part of the role of the centre is to stop crap happening, and everybody thinks they've got chocolate and want to do it their own way, and actually it's not true, because if that was true, we wouldn't be where we are now, would it? That said, we don't want to move at the pace of the slowest, and that's that was one of the observations I had of the NHS digital system before I became a minister. That's what was happening. This once for Wales notion was being interpreted as you can't move until everyone moves, and that's not what we want to achieve through the centre. What we want to achieve through the centre is a once for Wales approach through standards. And those standards can be interpreted differently in different organisations, but they need to reach the standard. And if they can reach it a different way, then good luck to them. And one of the things we're looking at is how we introduce spend controls as part of that, because stopping things happening is actually an important part of digital reform. But you've got to do it, you've got to stop the right things, haven't you? You've got to do it in the right way. So if that is your experience, James, I'd like to hear more about it. And and often you see blame being shifted because it's easier to blame somebody else than to face up your own shortcomings. So I don't know what's going on in your organisation and whether that's a fair characterisation or not. But perhaps I can ask Myra to address the question head on.
Hi, can you?
We could, and then you dropped out.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, great. Hello, everyone. Hi, James. We've not met, but hello. And let's follow up if there's a particular issue you want to raise. I mean, I would say about the centre is we are here to enable things to happen, not stop things happening. That is so not the intention. So at the moment, what we're doing a lot of is putting digital squads into different sponsored bodies to work with those sponsored bodies, enabling things to happen and doing a lot of training and skills development. Lee has referred to the standards, but you know, and standards are really difficult. And I know you talk about standards and assurance and everyone goes, oh no, you know, slap me on the wrist, stop me doing things, really awful. That is not how they're designed. They are designed and hopefully will become a reality so that actually we can make decisions faster, because we're not saying, you know, we're not constantly debating how we should do things which are pretty industry standard. So I don't think there should be any standards that come as shocks or are not collaborative or are not enabling. They're basically about knowing the guardrails and the ways of behaving and the ways of doing things, and just making it easier for us to make decisions faster across Wales, so we don't all waste time repeating things and making the same mistakes. But if they're not enabling and things aren't helping, let's take it up offline, because that's not what we're here for.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for that as well. Andrew Strong, you've popped a question in. If I allow you to talk, would you like to read out your question?
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Hope you can hear me. Hi. Thanks, Lee, for your introduction, and thanks, Victoria. I just wondered, you know, 1 year on from the launch of the strategy and its implementation plan, was there going to be a review to assess any progress made so far, which would give you that opportunity to sort of either, you know, pause, stop, continue things, and iterate your plans so we can make the most impact over the next 12 months? Thanks.
Fair question. To be honest, Andrew, our focus is on delivering it, because rather than reviewing at this stage. But I think a point for pause and reflection is a good idea. And why don't I, you know, so we are doing it iteratively. So we are reviewing each theme each month through a cross-government focus and going through it systematically and honestly judging where the weaknesses are. But I think my feeling is we're at the startup stage, and you know we've got a shed load to do. So I would rather focus on doing the stuff we know where we're shortcoming, rather than spending even more time pausing and reflecting. But so it's not as if we don't have systems in place to do that. I dare say the officials will have some plan for some formal review, but that's a good point. If you don't mind, I'll take it away and reflect on it and discuss it further.
I can see that Janine's just popped into the chat saying,
okay,
publish a refresh of the delivery plan by June. So
there you go. My suspicions confirmed.
Linked to that though, Lee, so outcomes really important. You've heard me bang on about it time and time again. You can have all the stuff, but actually this is about changing outcomes, not just doing stuff. What's your focus for the next 12 months for digital?
Well, I think getting the ecosystem of CDOs up and running, working, sharing, working collaboratively is my chief priority. And I think we've had the transition, as I say, in the leadership of the centre, which was a you know, could have been a delicate period, and I think it seems to be going well. So that's great. It's consolidating that and the work that Sam is doing at local authorities, and making sure the NHS steps up and steps into place and collaborates across, rather than just focuses on its own. You know, there's so much going on in the NHS. You can be forgiven for just narrowly looking, and I don't want that. I want them to look outward and to share the capacity and skills and knowledge they have with the rest, as well as being open to ideas from outside. So that's my principal focus. But then it's the continued scrutiny of all the different strands of the strategy. I think, you know, the skill, as I say, the skills bit is the bit that we need to do more on, and is keeping the pressure up on that. So those would be the sort of two ones that immediately pop into my head. But also, you know, to keep open-minded about this. You know, the whole point of iteration and user feedback is to have an open loop of learning. I'm doing 1,000 things, and this is only one of the things I'm doing. So this can't rely on me. But also, hopefully, I'm sufficiently open-minded that if there is feedback where areas needs additional focus, we can be agile enough to look at it.
So if anyone wants to drop any of those into the chat, what their priorities are, that's always good to see as well then. Can I just pick up, we'll come back to the questions in the chat. So something else I was thinking about there when you were talking about it. One of the things that we've seen, so we've been doing some work with different organisations in Wales around some of this digital stuff, and been doing some of that in third sector. And it's opened my eyes to something that I wasn't particularly aware of, and that was funding mechanisms. And seeing what the reliance is actually for many organisations and sectors, particularly local government, third sector, housing, to deliver services, they need different funding mechanisms. And they tend to be based on providing X and Y. So we will give you this money to do this thing, and we will judge you on whether that thing is done. And so that can lead to people going on just trying to deliver that thing rather than stepping back and understanding the root cause of issues or how services could better be designed to meet user needs. So instead of changing how things are done fundamentally to improve, they continue to do more of what they've always done to meet the funding needs. So it becomes this bit of a vicious circle. So that just increases pressure on organisations. They don't really tackle those underlying issues. They can't really innovate to deliver better services. Is there a question here for Welsh Government to think about how it adapts its funding and contract arrangements to accommodate that different way of working? So is it keeping up, I suppose? Is this an old funding mechanism that's not actually aligned to a different way of working?
Well, I'm very familiar with the problem. I've run 2 Welsh third sector organisations myself, so I completely understand the point. We are constrained by our own funding. That is one issue, which is a practical problem. But we have responded to this recently and announced we're moving to a 3-year budget planning round from this year, 22 to 25, precisely to respond to this feedback from the third sector, which should help us enable more medium-term budget planning. And also this funding for the centre is guaranteed on a similar basis for 3 years, which is really important. And also we're funding a partnership between the WCVA, the Welsh Co-op Centre and Promo Gymru to work specifically on third sector issues and development in response again to feedback from Derek Walker and others about the need for change in the third sector. And I believe as well, this third sector, I think Derek is on the board of the digital centre. Similarly, we recognise the third sector is an important part of the public sector delivery landscape. And if we want consistently good public services, we need to address the third sector as well as the statutory sector.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions, Chris? Or I can go on to one of the other areas I've got on my list.
No, there was a couple here. So, Catherine, let's have a look. Catherine, do you want to ask your question? You should be able to speak now. Okay, maybe not then. I'll read that out for you, Catherine. So, Lee, do you think that we need a CDO to cover the rest of the public sector outside local authorities and health?
Well, the original recommendation in the report that Victoria and I and others worked on was for a CDO Wales, so a system leader. And I still think there's lots of merit in that idea. To be honest, it was very pragmatic when we published the strategy a year ago. It was this time last year. We were just about to go into an election cycle. There was resistance in some parts of the system to having a CDO for Wales, and we were just pragmatically stopped, really. We either could go with what we had or delay the whole thing to try and get perfection. So I never believe that perfect should be the enemy of the good. So we went to what we've got. My ambition is that we build up the chief executive of the digital centre to in effect be the CDO Wales. But I think, as I said, my first priority is about maturing of the CDO ecosystem and about distributed leadership and making sure the standards we develop are owned by all of them and spread through all the different sectors. So my pragmatic judgment is not to get overly theological about it at this stage. I think there are other priorities in getting the maturity of the strategy embedded and getting the leadership to understand the value of digital and over-cluttering the landscape with CDOs is pragmatically not a priority. But I think we have the building blocks in place to allow that to happen in the future if this proves to be a success. And that's the big test for this agenda. and I just mentioned we've got 3-year funding for the centre. That wasn't a given. So, this has to prove its worth. We have a sceptical audience we're trying to persuade here. The whole point of the analysis of the strategy and the report before it is that people don't get digital. Well, if they don't get digital, they don't get the value of investing in digital either. And so we face a sceptical context, so we have to prove the value of it and prove the worth of it. And that's why I've been so pleased the way the centre's developed in its first year. And it has to continue to prove its value. And part of the way it proves its value is by influencing other parts of the public and private sector, and by attracting its own funding too. Because this shouldn't be just something for Welsh Government to fund centrally. Bodies should be mainstreaming this in their everyday. This should be what we do. It shouldn't be an extra thing you can only do if you get a grant. And that's the part of the challenge the centre has. But the fact we've got 3 years of funding for it shows it has proved its worth, and it'll need to continue to do that. And the fact we've added to the budget of the CDO for local government also shows this is a rolling stone and is building momentum, which is fantastic. And I think as it matures in momentum, I think there is role for further system leadership.
Brilliant, thank you, Lee. Could I ask one more, Victoria?
Yeah, go ahead.
So we've got one from Marco. Marco, I'll just push the button to allow you talk. But whilst that's happening in the digital space there, if anyone hasn't looked at the chat so far, there's a load of stuff on there that aren't necessarily questions, but I know Co-op have got several surveys out at the moment. They're inviting people to take part in. There's loads of people that are saying what great stuff they're doing in terms of digital. I know National Resource Wales, they're all like mini little case studies. So if you haven't had a look, just have a scroll through there. It's great for networking opportunities and finding similarities with the work that you're going on as well. But Marco, over to you for your question, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, great. So it's a simple question. So Lee, do you think that procurement officials need to understand digital so they know how and what to procure?
Yeah, I think everybody needs to understand digital, and they don't, and procurement officials are not different to that. As I say, we are working this. The procurement landscape is, as you know, Marco, undernourished, and there are lots of issues we need to get right in procurement, not just digital. The whole issue of social value, I think, is critical as well, and the digital is part of that. But hopefully, the building blocks we're putting in place by having a beta of a centre of excellence allows us to build up the different elements of the procurement system that needs strengthening, and digital for sure is one.
Yeah, as you can tell, it's a leading question because it's very difficult, because if you face procurement that don't understand, they will never procure something that's going to fit. Yeah. And so, same as Victoria's speaking, really, in terms of the funding models, there are some examples of people changing their models to be able to fit the idea around. So, because service design is about, and the whole thinking is about, you're actually working it out. You don't know what the answer is. Sure. If you knew what the answer is, you wouldn't do it. You wouldn't do service design. So, great, thank you.
And that's what I find exciting about the agenda. It's about culture change, isn't it? It's about accepting iterative change. We don't have to have the perfect product to go live. We can have a basic product, and we can interact with users in all forms and improve it. And that's not just about digital. That's about our approach to change. And that for me is the power of digital as a concept rather than as a service. Is that it is about just a far more mature approach to the development of ideas and services.
And I think that you're right, it's whole organisational stuff. And by that, I don't just mean individual organisations, I mean the whole system across Wales, isn't it? People need to be thinking differently to allow this good stuff to be happening. It can't just happen in one part of an organisation. It's not just your IT, it's about looking at the organisation, how it sets itself up as a whole to support it. So actually just teaching one little bit of it, this is what digital's about, isn't going to be the answer. But we need some good case studies as well, which hopefully the centre is starting to do. And as Chris just said, looking in the chat, there's some good stuff happening, that we need to be able to demonstrate people this is different and this is happening, and the communication around it, as I know I would say as a comms person, becomes really, really important, because we don't want to keep this hidden away in a corner. It's about sharing it and people seeing how it can be different, learning from each other, which, again, by Digital Leaders Wales is such an important thing for me personally, because it gives opportunity to network and hear what's going on. So we need to be doing more of that as well along the way. wanted to ask you one about connectivity, mission number 5. We're going to cover them all one way or another. So, Internet of Things, what a word, but you know, it's out there, it's real, it's opening up a wealth of opportunity for using data and technology to improve lives, you know, whether that's smart beaches in Ceredigion to managing housing stock in local authorities. What's the role of Welsh Government, the role of the strategy to make sure that Wales is connected digitally as well as through its physical infrastructure?
Well, I think the Internet of Things example is a good one, because I think we've made some progress on that in the last couple of years. There's a fantastic official called Peter Williams in the Welsh Government who I saw yesterday wielding a mole trap at somebody across a video conference in his enthusiasm to demonstrate the various applications that Laura Wan has. And through our reform programme for town centres and smart places, we've funded quite a lot of Laura Wan gateways and communities of practice, and Mentor Moan is doing a really good job for us there, and they're doing some great work in their own right in this space and have done for a while. And I'm going to Stoneleigh on Monday to talk precision agriculture, because again I think this is a much neglected area with potential of using this Laura Wan Internet of Things approach to improve not just farm productivity, reduce the impact, we talk about net zero, of agricultural pollution by using fewer chemicals, but also then the industrial knock-on consequences. And, you know, it's an example. It is applicable to other areas as well. We shouldn't just be looking at one bit of it. We need to look at the whole pipeline. So, to give the example of precision agriculture, but it could apply elsewhere. You know, it's the on-farm application, which will help farmers become more resilient and more productive, and as part of that, reducing the biodiversity impact. But also, then, how do we get the kit? So, you know, if we're using robots, why can't we make the robots in Wales? The data that comes out of it, we should be harnessing that here. We should be designing the software here, rather than exporting it to America or to China, who then will lock in, have ownership of our data. So there's a huge system potential to bring economic and societal benefits to Wales from if we get this right. But you know, we're just not moving fast enough. Is my continued frustration. But you know, we are making progress. I think it'd be churlish not to acknowledge that. The broader connectivity point is a difficult one. Broadband connectivity, telecommunications, is not devolved to the Welsh Government, much to my frustration. So we are reliant on the UK government, who have a different philosophy to us. They believe in the free market, and they believe the free market should just do its thing. I had a very frustrating meeting with Ofcom this week, who can tell? Next week, I think. It's a blur. On the limits of the market, because the market may well serve urban conurbations well, but it doesn't serve lots of Wales well. And had it not been for the Welsh Government using European funding and our own funding to intervene to get superfast broadband up to now to 95% of premises, we'd have been about 40-odd% if left to the market. And my worry is if we move to gigabit and move to 5G, simply relying on the market will further compound the inequalities that the market gives an economy and society like Wales. So there's a real shortcoming to their approach. We've got a limited finance, and my appetite for bailing out the UK government is diminishing. And I don't think we should be really funding extra top-up vouchers, which is money not spent for other things, other areas of digital reform and other areas of reform. So that is a live question about where we best use our limited resource to have greatest effect, and how we challenge the UK government to step up. But there are real constraints, but they are constraints properly directed at the UK government. You know, unless they're prepared to devolve it, they own it, and if they own it, they're accountable for it, and we should be directing our fire at them.
Thank you. I've got a final question. But we've still got 8 minutes. Don't want to let you off early. Is there any?
Feel free to let me have lunch.
You say that.
That would be fine.
Did anyone have any last questions? If anyone wants to stick a hand up, or Chris, if you let me know someone's been waiting, we'll do one more question to the floor before I do a final question for Lee.
We do have one from Polly Thompson. It's from quite a while back. I missed it. So apologies, Polly. If you're still around, though, would you like to ask your question?
Polly's in housing, I believe.
Okay, I can find that. Hold on a second.
I'll find it now. Oh, I just saw Polly up here.
Hey.
I'm muting myself right now. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yeah.
surprisingly complicated, isn't it? Thanks. Hello, everyone. Yeah, I'll have to remember my question. It was about whether there was potential to influence via regulatory bodies. So as a housing association, we're regulated by Welsh Government. I don't think the current regulatory framework actively makes things harder to do, good digital harder to do, but it doesn't do much to support good digital, I don't think. But it feels like there's potential for that to be a kind of a positive influence, and that's maybe a trick that's missed at the moment.
Okay, well, I'm intrigued by that, Polly, and I'd like to hear more. And one advantage of this enormous portfolio the First Minister's given Julie James and I is it covers almost everything. So there are definite downsides to that, but there are some upsides as well. So housing sits alongside digital in our responsibilities. So I'd be very keen to understand more about what you think the constraints are and how we improve them. I'm interested in identifying barriers and identifying solutions. So if you have both of those, I'm all ears, and by all means, drop me an email directly or come through the officials or whatever suits you best. But let's have a conversation about that.
Okay, fab. I will do. Yes.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Polly. Thank you. Yeah, a nice, easy one for you need to finish with. We've got brilliant turnout today, so thank you, everyone. We've got over 100 people on the call at the moment. Oh. So that's great. Wanted to hear about what's going on digital, but that means you have got over 100 people who care about this stuff. They've taken time out of their lunchtime to hear what you've got to say about the digital strategy, to find out more what's going on, maybe to take things away and do something. What's your message to them?
Well, I think my message is, first of all, thank you for your for joining the cause, because this is a movement for change. It's not about tech. It's about improving people's lives, and digital is a way to do that. And I think a powerful way to do that. And I think it's exciting because it is about a community of practice. This is not about lone heroes. This is about people working together, and that's why I think it's so exciting about the squads. It's about multidisciplinary teams, about recognizing the value of different skill sets and how they complement each other and work together, and through doing that, see things in different ways and see problems and solutions they never otherwise would have done. And I think that's just a really exciting way to work, and learning in the open as well, being honest about mistakes, constraints, barriers, and just fessing up to that and just saying help. And that's why I wanted to publish the draft of the strategy before it came out, because it was an admission of this is where we've got to. It could be better. You know better. Let us know how to make it better. And I think it's important we keep that spirit going as we move along the reform journey. And it's really important to me that we keep challenging each other, being honest and open about the constraints. And that's a two-way process that applies as much as me challenging you as you challenging me, and the leaders who are in place. And I think that's vital. If we're serious about this, we've got to follow through on the rhetoric. It is about culture, and we're all part of culture, and we can improve together.
Thank you, Diolch yn fawr, Lee, for joining us today and for your insights. I agree with you. We've got a long way to go, but we are making progress. Thinking back to that conversation 4 years ago, whatever it was, where we sat in a room and you were like, nothing's happening. And I'm like, I know, it's killing me. It's great to see stuff has moved on. Yeah. We've got a lot more to do, and I'm really reassured by the amount of people who've turned up today, because that does make us think there's people out there wanting to do this stuff. So thank you for being involved, and thank you for everyone who's joined us today. As I said, this is the first of the Digital Leaders Wales sessions, specific sessions for this year. We're going to be holding more. As I said, we are hoping to get some face-to-face, but actually we're also going to keep some of the online stuff, because I think it's really important that we try and make sessions accessible as possible. People can't always traipse. Cardiff, I would say Cardiff, being in Swansea, so I'm going to moan about it, whether we traipse to Cardiff or wherever. We want people to be involved. So we're open to ideas for types of sessions you might want to have, where you might want to have them, how you want it to be. So please do get in touch. You can follow Digital Leaders Wales on Twitter, as well as the main Digital Leaders account. So please do so. We'll be sharing Welsh specific content around digital on there as well. So that just leaves me as well to say diolch to Angharad and Chris for supporting today. Thank you to all of you who've come along, and thank you again, Lee.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Lee.
All the best. Keep in touch.